After much anticipation, the final installment of Tallanah's journey in Horizon Zero Dawn's comic series has finally been released. We'll be summarizing the events and story of this latest issue, but also diving into the minor details and clues within the pages that may give us a greater understanding of Horizon's ever-expanding world. If you haven't watched our other videos on earlier issues, be sure to get all caught up on the story so far. A spoiler warning is now in effect, and with that said, let's begin. As the last issue concluded, just as Tallanah and Amadis had formulated a plan to collapse the cave that housed the cauldron, they came face to face with its protector. Emerging from the water, the massive shell snapper made its attack. With energy blasts and gnashing jaws, the two hunters were instantly put on the defensive. Knowing that Chiron and his band were too in the caves, hoping to claim the bounty on Amadis, Tallanah set a plan in motion. Running back towards the cave entrance, Tallanah and Amadis rushed past their pursuers. Just as the two were about to come under arrow fire, the rogue lodge member was faced with a much larger problem. With one of the mercenaries being sent off their feet, the rest took flight out of the cavern behind the waterfall. First out, Tallanah instructed Amadis to follow their original plan of constructing a blast bomb from a blaze canister from a nearby grazer herd, while she stayed to distract Chiron. As the beast emerged from behind the waterfall, Chiron's hunters struggled to deal with the new machine. Chiron, however, was focused on his quarry and began to hone in on Tallanah's location. He took shots over the rock where she was taking cover, but in another clever move from the Sunhawk, she used the hood of Amadis that she had taken from him before he left to trick Chiron into thinking his prize was still close at hand. With the time afforded him, Amadis was able to construct his blast bomb. Unfortunately, as he was about to make his return, he was set upon by a claw strider in the underbrush. The story cuts back to the fight under the falls. One of Chiron's arrows shoots through Amadis' hood, nearly hitting Tallanah. She takes her own shot but barely misses, but it's at this moment she notices something peculiar. With every shot that strikes the machine's shell, it lights up more and more. Just then, Amadis bursted through the underbrush towards the water. An archer is able to pierce his shoulder, but at that moment, the claw strider that had been in pursuit makes its entrance and sets to attacking Chiron's hunters instead. With the situation still looking perilous, Tallanah takes a chance. With the shell snapper still glowing, she fires 3 arrows at its shell. Shouting at Amadis to take cover under the water, he dives. Not a moment later, the shell snapper unleashes a massive pulse of energy, sending both hunters and machines alike flying. Emerging above water, injured but determined, Amadis darts back into the cave to complete their mission. Outside the cavern, however, the danger had not yet passed. Charging through rock and water, Tallanah barely avoids the machine's attack. Readying herself, she pulls out all the stops, deciding it's time for her best move. She takes aim and fires what appears to be a unique kind of arrow, temporarily blinding the machine in a cloud of white. She then charges the machine, leaping deftly from component to component up and over the shell snapper towards Amadis, who had just emerged himself. Knowing what's to come, he tackles her beneath the water just as the blast bomb detonates behind them. Resurfacing when things finally seem safe, Chiron and his cronies take aim at the two hunters from atop a still and slumped shell snapper. Chiron begins to revel in the thought of claiming his bounty and taking the title of Sunhawk, when the machine comes to life once more, flinging Chiron towards the cliffs and crushing another of his cohort beneath its clawed foot. As those left take flight, Tallanah takes up Chiron's spear, slides beneath the machine, carving deep into its vulnerable underbelly, finally bringing it down. The story then flashes forward, as both Tallanah and Amadis stand on a hill overlooking his ruined former home. After a brief conversation, Amadis picks a flower for the Sunhawk and lets her know the kind of impression she had on him. Realizing that his life might mean more than hiding in the shadow of his past, he decides he must return to the Forbidden West, looking for the closure that finding and laying his former companion Nessa to rest would bring. From there, he takes his leave, promising to write her in 2 months' time when she is returned to Meridian. Once alone, she reflects on what set her on her new journey, to fulfill a contract and to find a new purpose. Through this experience, she found something more, knowing that her place is out in the wild protecting her people from the ever-increasing machine threat that the future is sure to bring. And so, closing this chapter in Tallanah's journey for now. The final text of the comic goes on to confirm our long-established thought that the Sunhawk will be featured in the sequel, stating, "Tallanah's story will continue in Horizon Forbidden West." Additionally, being that he stated his next destination is the Forbidden West, I think there's a fairly good chance that Amadis may appear in the next game. He and Tallanah have been forming a strong connection over the course of the comics, culminating in some rather romantic moments in this final chapter. I think it would be an odd choice on behalf of the writing team to introduce a love interest for Tallanah and have no intention of following up on that plotline. This particular installment of the comics was also quite combat heavy, introducing us to some of the unique and fearsome abilities of the Shell Snapper. At the beginning of the comic, there's a small section that details some of the specifics concerning the machine. Shell Snapper. Class: Combat. Habitat: primarily in or near water. Description: the amphibious Shell Snapper can dig itself in and lie dormant for days or even weeks, allowing its impenetrable shell to become covered by the surrounding foliage. Once alerted to a potential threat in its vicinity, this large combat class machine will quickly return to full readiness, often catching the interloper off guard. It seems that this description only scratches the surface concerning this machine. In Melee, we saw its fearsome jaws, headbutts, and claws tear through numerous hunters. Combatants are also likely to find little respite at range either, as it appears that the Shell Snapper is capable of launching powerful energy blasts from its mouth. In fact, it might be necessary to get closer than any of us are typically used to if we're going to be able to bring down these machines in the sequel. Anything that attempted to damage its shell, blasts, arrows not only seemed to be ineffective, but also gave the machine energy to launch devastating countermeasures. Following Tallanah's example, damaging its underbelly may be the only way to inflict damage on these large combat class machines. Finally, we may have seen a new ammo type make its first canonical appearance. In previous issues, we saw Amadis use smoke bombs to disorient machines, but during her fight with a Shell Snapper, we saw something resembling some kind of smokescreen arrow. Hopefully, we'll be able to use both of these in the sequel, expanding Aloy's potential arsenal from the first game. Personally, finishing this first arc was bittersweet. We were able to spend more time with the Sunhawk leading up to the sequel, but now we have to wait and see what else can help us get through the wait before we get to venture ourselves into the Forbidden West. And that brings our journey to an end. If you'd like to see more content like this, likes and shares are always appreciated, and if you're hungry for more Horizon lore, be sure to subscribe and ring that bell. Also consider supporting the channel on Patreon, so we can keep creating content just like this. Check out the link in the description. And as always, thanks for watching, and keep questing.